Hello, everyone. My name is Taylor Roth. I'm the host of the 13th Harmonic, and our guest here today with us is Emakhet Ra. Thank you so much, Emakhet, for joining us today and blessing us with your presence and with the
Thanks
presence
for
of
having
the
me.
Dream Council and all of the wonderful divine feminine and masculine energies that you bring and the balance to this waking dream. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Oh, it's such an honor and a pleasure. Thanks for having me here.
So, you agreed to come on this show not knowing at all what kind of questions were going to arise. That takes some bravery. Where did you learn this bravery, or where did you remember this bravery within you?
Wow, what a great question to start off with. I think that I've always been a little bit precocious and curious and interested in what would happen if I showed up in new situations and responded to them. And one of my favorite things to do is talk with friends and allies about dreams and about divination and about the mysteries of life. And so I think I've always had particularly a precociousness when it comes to these subjects. And so when I'm invited and it feels like a yes and it's in alignment with what I feel is my purpose, then absolutely I'm open. And I do professional oracle work, and so in my work I'm in the business of questions. I'm in the business of people coming and asking questions, and I really believe in artful questions and the ability to ask really artful questions that open up insights. So yeah, it's right in my wheelhouse.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, sometimes once I start getting like the initial downloads for the recording, my mind starts racing off, and I have to like really work at it to stay grounded and present, because I feel the timelines like I'm like, no,
Yeah,
this way we're going, and my inner
yeah.
child's like full lock, so it's just, he
Mhm.
knows where it's going.
Yeah, I feel that too sometimes in recording these transmissions and beaming in this way through modern technology, because we have our experience now, but then also those future viewers who are going to be tuning in later. And so we're really enacting this kind of time travel, Star Wars, Princess Leia kind of situation here, which is great. And one thing I like to do when I feel that coming up is to say hello to my future self and say hello to the future and all those future viewers that are watching, and thank you for tuning in. You could have been anywhere else and you chose here, and maybe that's not a coincidence.
Yeah, in my experience, the maybe is becoming less and less of a maybe with each day, and truly to acknowledge the viewers who are, I always want to say the viewers from the archives, because I like envision, this Jedi library on Arcturus or throughout the galaxy that's like upheld by, the Guardian Alliance and other groups that like have these storehouses of learning and like holographic, frequency.
Mm.
And to be able to speak to someone who's, accessed the holocron and is really diving in and attempting to maybe find a jumping in point to this timeline on Earth now, because this is where it's at. I mean, let's be honest. Earth circa 2019, everybody said it was 2012, but I don't know. Right now it feels like one of the most potent times to be on this planet.
Mm.
And so it's almost like creating an extending web of dreams that then brings in dreamers from throughout time and space into now, because as our level of technology increases, as our level of spirituality increases, there's so many interwoven fabrics and nodes of connection. Virtual reality, lucid dreaming, there's really no difference. It's just how the permission slip is granted to the self.
Hmm.
So it's like spreading wings and feeling those wings connect to so many different nodes of the quantum fabric. Like, I keep looking at this beautiful being behind you, and who is this with the arms spread in the air? Who is this?
Yeah, so this is the goddess Isis. She's also known as Aset. She's actually a goddess of 10,000 names. And her wings spread so wide that they spread around the whole universe. She is one of the oldest known worshipped goddess on the planet. And I particularly have the black Isis here, which is a dark Isis. And we're really into the Black Madonna and the darker aspects of the goddess in tandem with her lighter aspects. And I was ordained her priestess 13 years ago, and have been on such a crazy ride since then, actually. Very much like you were saying earlier, where it's becoming less and less of a maybe. These synchronicities, they become more the way that it is. I've definitely found that through choosing to walk this path with Isis. And she's the oldest known worship deity, and yet here we are in these modern times with modern technology. And I often think about her as this consistent, this continuity within the changes, within the rise and fall of empires, within the evolution of humankind. She's always been there. She's always been with us, and she always will be. And that to me is something I'm really drawn to, is that universal energy, the 10,000 names, the wings that wrap that wide, that all inclusivity and the timelessness that she brings forward, that I find very important when really anchoring certain seeds of information in certain times in history. You know, it's like we were born for these times. I really do believe we were born for these times. And I think of it a lot with technology. Like, I'm so glad I have Google Sky Map, and I can just see what constellation that is so easily, you know. Or I'm so glad we can web chat across the world, and I can meet my kin and know my kin and really connect with our soul family more easily. And I believe I was born in this time to have those things available so I could do the work I needed to do. And that work, the work that I kind of devoted myself to, that I have devoted my life to, is to anchor in then through these avenues, the timelessness, the dream, you know, the soul, and that part of us that soul that lives in all of us, that some of us are maybe forgot about or are unaware of, and reawakening that so that we can be these kind of immortal, timeless beings in this very mortal and very specific era of history. It's frightening and incredible and awe-inspiring, and this whole Earth School is just so amazing. So I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's funny. You brought up the web connection, you know, being able to see each other through the web, and it connected to something we were talking about during the pre-show about like the Jedi holocrons and archives and temples of records and data. And I really see, I've seen this from my Arcturian aspects perspective, like hundreds of students just sitting with a holocron each, you know, each investigating, connecting, using their third eye into this space of data, being supervised by Arcturian teachers. And in that space, it's like each student is having an individual experience on Earth. And one of the trippiest parts is that so many people who are having that experience just naturally have this assumption that everyone else is experiencing the same Earth. But from the Arcturian perspective, there's 100 different Earths happening at that same moment, and what's happening is there are some converging nodes, you know. So let's say that each one of those 100 people, those 100 Arcturian students, each encounters some aspect of you, of Emakhet. So then they begin to see this weaving of frequency and form that then creates this stronger emanation, which then acts as an anchor point to connect those different universes together into one planet, into one cosmic womb. Like you were mentioning with the divine goddess, there's been so much that I've heard growing up about the divine masculine. And the divine masculine to me is the projection of consciousness. But the divine feminine is what enfolds that and supports that and nurtures that and allows it to be within the space of creation, the womb of creation itself. So it's like they're both essential components, but they serve in different capacities and different roles. So notice that your Isis has, it looks like honor guards by her. I see a jackal-headed being, and I've seen them in my dreams before as a form of honor guard for me.
Yeah, when we've done journey work with Dream Council and Sphinx Mystery School around Egypt, particularly Anubis often comes in, the jackal-headed god Anubis, as a gatekeeper, and he stands at the gateway between the waking dream and the night dream, or between the living and the dead, between the worlds. And part of why he has a jackal head is because jackals are carrion animals in the desert, and they eat dead things and they bring them back to life through their own body. So carrion animals often become associated with this kind of gatekeepership and guardianship. And Anubis is associated with the guardianship of the underworld before we kind of move into the afterlife. So he's Isis's guard dog in a lot of ways, and in the mythology, he is the son of Osiris and the son of Nephthys, who is Isis's dark sister. So he's like her stepson / nephew. It gets a little incestuous in the Egyptian mythology.
I don't think they're the only mythology to have those.
Yeah. So, and this is one of many shrines that live in my space. I have shrines to goddesses and also to masculine deities. I have a Nataraj for Shiva, for dance. I have an angel Michael, who is also a divine guardian. So the Isis shrine is where I do most of my work. It's kind of the home base where I read from and perform ritual and perform dream counsel. So I like to anchor myself here when I'm tuning in with everyone and feel her kind of presence there as well. It's also not to get, I don't want to get on a soapbox about it, but also I found that as a priestess of Isis in the turn of this millennium, and the resurgence of these ancient traditions coming back, the resurgence of the goddess traditions really coming to the forefront, that in the same token, the name Isis has become very triggering for many people. It's if you search Isis on Google these days, you're going to see, terrorist organizations and beheadings and all of these atrocious things. And when that happened, I went underground a little bit and didn't want to bring her name forward or bring her forward out of my own fear. And so part of why I bring her in now is because I realized that symbols can be utilized and infused with personal meaning and intention. And when a symbol or a name is being co-opted towards something, it's important for us to anchor those symbols back, or like reclaim these symbols and utilize them towards peace and prosperity and health and well-being. So recently I've changed my mind to not hide as much, but really kind of bring her forward and say, this is Isis, this is what she is.
Yeah. And yeah, there's definitely been a lot of co-opting of sacred symbology on this planet. And at least in my experience, there were a couple things that I pulled from that statement that you made. One of them was the anchor here. when you said that, it immediately acted as this beacon to my consciousness to return to the now moment.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of those paths that I've found myself wandering many, many times and found my way back to the here and now is that path of journeying through storytelling, through mythology, through the potentials of the quantum field.
Mm-hmm.
And it's recognizing that, in a way, interweaving multiple Earths, like the Arcturian students. What was your perspective on that? What if 99 of them had total awareness of Isis as a goddess of love and protection and whatever else she symbolizes to you, and yet this is an internal struggle about reclaiming that name of Isis? Like, it was only, imagine DNA that gets transcribed, and then at some point the transcription process mutated and failed to communicate correctly, like, and it's just reconnecting, reweaving those into what feels like a proper flow. So if my perspective, this is something I play with a lot, is what if I'm quote unquote the crazy one on the planet? What if I'm the one who's seeing all this darkness, and it's up to me to move through the process and heal it within me, to then be able to see the world which already exists in the multiple span of infinity. And that's how I anchor that sacred space back, at least within myself. I don't know what a similar process, if any, is for you. Is that something that you feel like you've experienced in some way?
Yeah. I really feel you when you're saying, you know, that part of how we anchor this here is through our own inner work, and through reflecting with these archetypes, these mythic beings, these characters, reflecting like, what is my association with that? Where did that come from? You know, what is being called to be deprogrammed and reprogrammed around my association with these symbols and archetypes. And I found that with the mother goddess, that most of us, I think not just those who are drawn to the mother goddess, but most of us are longing for a healthier relationship with our own mothers and with women, whether we're men or women. And I remember being young, my mom saying to me, I said, "Mom, why is everyone praying to a male god?" And she said, "Because we also often pray for what we lack. And we if you live in the desert, you pray for water, you know? And so if you're in a desert of divine masculine energy, you pray for more of that as well." And so for me, I realized that sometimes when we're in, like, there's religious programming that says, you know, deity is a being that lives separate from you and lives out in the clouds somewhere over there. And if you're a good boy or a good girl, you can have some of their favor. And if you're bad, they're going to punish you. Where these archetypes, these forms, like when I stand before the Nataraj, I am mirroring that dancer in me. It's there because I've attributed a personal meaning that and it's plugged into that collective consciousness that those many timelines are branching out into, and there's different associations they're living. I'm participating in that map by individuating, like by allowing myself to have a personal relationship with that archetype, and then also reflect something within myself or do some inner work, inner healing that I feel is helping to anchor that energy back, feed it back into the collective. I do feel like sometimes we become I've felt before like I am here for a very specific purpose, and I believe I still believe that's very true. I'm here to do some work and play, but that's part of my work. But like I'm here purposefully, you know. But that has led sometimes to being like, oh, well, if I don't do this, like the whole universe is going to fall apart. And there is a sense of this impersonal aspect of being alive and being here that is actually freeing, in a sense of giving us the permission to just interact with what is and to connect to what is, that I feel relieves some of that pressure, where I felt like, you know, being a part of the Galactic Family of Light, being a part of these interdimensional councils, you know, choosing to sign up as a soul in this lifetime to participate in this timeless, spaceless reality, in order to retrieve and to retrieve information and plant information. Sometimes that's led to being like, if I don't do this, like everything's going to explode. And I think there's something very personal about a process and a practice of the idea of as within, so without. That that as I am working in the microcosmic level of my consciousness, it is reflected out into the multiple levels. So if it were me and I was like, oh, okay, there's many timelines, there are Earth timelines, and like one of them has this and one of them has that, I feel like I would then look at my internally in my relationship with myself. Do I feel like I am also on multiple timelines and doing multiple things? And like that, again, the Nataraj with the many arms dancing, like many arms can be doing many things at once, but the central body of that figure is centered and is silent and still within that seed point, seed sound, I like to call it, the sound of creation that lives in each of us. So that was a lot of different things, but to answer your question, long story long. Yeah.
I liked what you said, especially the part about the 10,000, or you said many arms, and I was thinking of 10,000 names can be many places at once, serving many roles. And it's so easy at times to become lost in the stories, to become overwhelmed by them. I know one of the greatest challenges I've had in this life has been to shut off my mind, so to speak. Not just to stop asking questions, but to be able to discern that questions are being asked at all. You know, like to be able to find this place of stillness where there's actually a force within me that is able to perceive almost like ripples on the pond. And to be able to either choose to be involved with it or to not. And there are times where I've chosen to get involved, and then it's taken me some time to remember that I'm not that particular ripple. I mean, I am, but I'm more than that. I'm all of the ripples together. And so being able to pick the ripples that are emanating from self and getting into the realm of whether it's even why have ripples to begin with, you know? So I've seen myself go down these areas, these very dark seeming holes of consciousness where it feels like there are no answers. Everyone always says to me, well, the answer is within, you know? And it's like, that's true, but in a way the answer comes because I choose for there to be an answer. I choose for that to be the current answer. It doesn't mean that there won't be a better one at some point, but in this current state, that's the best answer that I have, is that the answer is within, but it has to be kind of stoked and invited and danced with. It's something that has many different faces. And it's only in interacting with enough of those forms that the belief system of who one is begins to dissolve. And once that dissolution begins to take place, there's this emptiness that then invites the essence of self to really begin to bubble in and surface. And I feel that deeply each day. And I'm so grateful for each being, each event that's happened in my life if those things had not happened in that particular way, there'd be a different quantum probability of Taylor here right now. And maybe there's a way to still talk about the same thing regardless of how I got here. But there's a part that has to acknowledge the road that led here. Mm-hmm. And how informative that has been to who I currently am. But who I currently am is just as important as any other person that I've ever been, any other identity that I've ever held. So it's like there was something you said about the universe exploding if something isn't, contained. And I think that what it is the containing of self in form, constantly. It's almost like constantly weaving this suit again and again and again. Even though it looks solid, it's ever expanding, and it's like attempting to keep it down to this 6 foot tall, 130 pound form instead of busting out to 20 feet tall and being like, what's up, Earth? You're so much smaller, So to keep oneself contained, but to not have it feel like a limiting thing.
Yeah.
I think that's really the journey.
I feel like divine feminine energy, like even being drawn to the dark goddess, it's that womb, it's that container that can hold it all. And she says, okay, I can hold it all. Like I can hold all of it. And so there's a surrendering into that nature within us, within all beings and all life. We all have that goddess seed inside that is silent and still and is holding it all together. And the mind is an amazing servant and a vicious master. It is meant as a tool to help us to translate experiences that we have, deeper, subtle experiences. Dreams are a great example where I'll dream of a symbol or a phrase or a place or a word I've never heard of before, not consciously. And so I utilize my mind when I wake up to go research what it is that happened and try and make logical sense of it after I've had an initial experience. And we can play with that, the other direction of saying, well, I'm going to have this experience and then have it. But I think there's something about that surrender and the listening and the receptivity and the in the some Zazen traditions, it's called neti, not this, and it's every thought that arises. It's not that. It's allowing it to happen, but it's not any of that. And so that's a great place to start. And I think especially with deity work, that it's really because we carry so many beliefs and programs around what deity is, to begin with not that. None of this is true. None of this is real. All of it is, where's the nothing, that seed, that source seed inside, which the word son of God, I like to think of it like the sound of God. It's a sound that is resonating cymatic matter into existence. We tune into that. We get clearer with what this actually is, and that silent stillness. From there, it's almost like a toroidal field. It implodes back out, where now I realize, like Starhawk says, that magic is the stories we tell ourselves. It's what I am attributing to this that brings it personal meaning. It's not that. It's not that that's doing anything. It's not even me that's doing anything. We are just the activity of the transcendental. And when I've had that arise in me before, sometimes I've thought, well, then what's the point, right? It's meaningless. But it actually begins to empower us to attribute meaning, to choose to attribute meaning. And I feel like most magic and ritual and magic work, is really that. It's attributing a meaning to something and then participating in this reality with it. I'm very precocious about wanting to understand the answers and wanting to know why. And I'm in human design. I have an undefined third eye chakra, and so I'm constantly like, well, why? I want to know, and thirsty for that knowledge. There's pressure there for that knowledge. And so it's really helpful to like give it the framework and the context as that's happening of, and also like neti, neti. That's where I find the peace and calm to return back to again and again, to be able to integrate whatever knowledge is surfacing or arising. Yeah.
That it does. In my experience, I personally feel drawn to perceiving myself as a multi-dimensional being, or at least multi-facets, because there's the part of me that is incapable of doing anything. Because to do something would be some form of labeling, and any form of labeling is a conditional. So there's this part of me that simply is beyond any and all definition, unqualified, absolute in the unqualifiedness of it. And then there's like the human, which is kind of just the body, the experience of being an avatar, so to speak, a symbolic representation, a projection of consciousness within consciousness, to then have an embedded experience within the, like an embodiment of the infinite within a seemingly finite container. Like to take everything that could be and compress it into something that definitely is, but at the same time is not. And then the master is like the one who chooses, to me. So that's kind of how I revolve that particular triangle. So it's like finding a balance of all of those interacting forces, knowing that some of them don't necessarily do anything per se. They just are. Yeah, it's like, for me, my light side is on my heart. It goes up into infinite realms of light and infinite night on the right side. And that's the void, to me, the space of nothingness. And yet everything is there. And the light is kind of the ordered, beautiful dancing lands and things like that. But also it's how I've experienced it recently is in dreams, being able to actually be an observer within the dream mode. And as my telepathic awareness has been coming online more and more, I've heard my friends in my head, like not over the phone. I've heard them speaking, and felt that I almost interrupted, something that, hold on. Because usually it's a multi-dimensional friend, someone who's very tapped in, who I happen to connect to their feed. And then, I feel maybe I was disrespectful or something. I'm like, you know what? It's okay. I'm here. I'm sorry. Stepping back into my boundary, right? I didn't know about this aspect until just now. So being able to acknowledge that within the dream state, I've had dreams where I've felt like I'm a GoPro kind of on top of, a football player's head or whatever. And then I end up in an after party and, I see people who are tall and people who are short. And I remember from previous dreams, oh, right, the taller people are when the higher selves are actually connected to the 3D vessel in that space. So it's like the taller a being is, for me, this is how my consciousness presents it to me, is that they're dialed in. So I see the tallest being in this space and wave to him, and they're like, yeah, you're doing good. And then I look around and I'm like, why aren't there more higher selves connected to their vessels? And then I see this woman grow like 2 feet in the air, zip up the back of her dress, like finished getting dressed in her suit. So just the acknowledging of that then invites in, this deeper connection of, oh, I forgot about that part of myself, I think, from that person's perspective. So I'm like remembering these pieces of myself, and then knocking on a friend's door, so to speak, mentally, and being like, hey, can I come visit you? And then I hear this friend chanting magical incantations and everything, and I'm flying through astral space. I don't see anything, but I'm able to get it dialed in, and I hear more clearly what they're saying. And then I come out of this rectangular portal, and it looks like Greek architecture made of clouds. And my
Mhm.
friend is standing there to my left side, reaching down to help me. And there's this mansion behind him.
Mm.
So it's just this beautiful interweaving of consciousness. And I think where I was going with that was, as these additional levels, these additional dimensions of consciousness open for people to experience, I think it's very important that people are aware of what they're dreaming,
Mm.
that people keep records, and that they study this as if it's an important part of themselves, just as important as the waking time. You know, I go to
Mhm.
sleep and I'm working.
Yeah.
And what's your perspective on there's a question, it will be dialed in in the next 10 seconds. The importance of treating the dream as more than just a dream.
Mm. Mhm.
Because I've seen so many people encourage what I consider to be irresponsible lucid dreaming practices, and
Mhm.
treating everybody as if they're less than you, kind of like, oh, I'm lucid, so now this is my dream and I get to run everything, you know?
Mhm.
And they treat people and maybe walk up and start having sex with random people. And it's like, would you do that in your waking life? Because if you're really lucid, maybe invite in a lucid partner and see how that, you know, sex relationship goes. Like, invite in somebody who's actually operating at your level rather than just taking like a kid at a candy store. And I
Yeah.
had this experience myself. That's how I started with my dreams, was at that layer of,
Mhm.
and then understanding and being like, oh my gosh, maybe I'm not being very respectful of people in this space. And if I
Right.
treat them with more respect, then maybe my waking state can have more of that as well.
Mhm. I
So
call it the interdimensional diplomacy policies that get set in place when we're doing this dream work, and just learning how to be a good ally and polite with beings, that both human beings we might know from Earth and otherwise. Um, and that, so yeah, and the question around, well, so when we're kids, oftentimes we wake up from a nightmare and our parents tell us, oh, it was just a dream, it wasn't real. And they're
mhm.
doing that out of the kindness of their heart to help us feel better about whatever fear has surfaced. But what can happen is, over time, we dismiss our dreams as random, we dismiss them as unimportant, and often don't remember, because they can be frightening or show us shadow material that's calling to be integrated. And so it's important to know what it feels like to know, no, that wasn't just a dream. You really did experience that. You saw it, you smelled it, you tasted it, you touched it. Um,
Mm.
One of the reasons that's very important is because what part of us saw that? What part of us smelled that? What touched that? Because it wasn't my eyes. My eyes were closed. You know, so what saw that? And so, just like, one of my favorite examples from one of my teachers, KRS-One, shout out to the teacher KRS-One, was, to imagine a word. Like, let's say we're both going to imagine the word dream in our minds, on the count of three. So on the count of three, let's play a game. And for those watching, you can play along. So on the count of three, we're going to say to ourselves, not out loud, but inside, dream. So, okay. So 1, 2, 3. And so we heard it, right? And we said it, but we didn't. What part of us did that, right? That part of us is the part that is also that soul aspect of ourselves that's dreaming, that's in that experience. So it's very important to acknowledge the truth of the situation, and do our best to call back what Robert Moss says. Call back the dream fairy. It's when we lose our dream fairy, they fly out the window somewhere. We had a nightmare, we smoked too much weed, we got too busy with work, and we forgot our dreams. To call back that dream fairy, and it's as simple as sometimes literally opening the window and saying, come back, so that we can begin to remember, like you said, remember those aspects of ourselves that just said dream. Uh, the other piece around dream telepathy, which we're at the Egypt altar, it's relevant because in ancient times in Egypt, the very much Egyptian dream practicing was involved with lucidity and dream telepathy, and being able to train ourselves to meet in these alternate dimensions, and bring back basically dream formation from these places and to here. And I have practiced dream telepathy with many friends before, and sometimes that's conscious. We've decided to. Sometimes that's not been conscious. And also the Mohawk Iroquois teachings through Island Women ask us to, when we have a dream with someone else, to ask, is this a visitation or is this an aspect of my own psyche that I'm mirroring? Like, as a dream worker, I've had guys say, oh, you've come into my dream and we've been intimate with each other and I know it was you. And I'm like, no, that wasn't me. I probably came in as an image of the feminine for you to help you relate to it, but I would know, because not only could I maybe remember the experience, but even if I don't, I don't give, unless I give you permission, it's not me. And I've set that perimeter around myself to say, unless I give someone permission to dream with me, then it's not a visitation. I'm just representing something to them. And we can choose to put on archetypal roles in order to give our culture something to have relationship with. That's why since ancient time we dress as deity to kind of project that forward into society to give us the opportunity to relate with it. So we do show up for each other that way. But sometimes we don't. Sometimes I can tell the difference if I'm visiting with someone or with a being or someone who's passed on, versus whether it's just a form of my own psyche that is calling. Those personality traits are ones that I am looking to call back into my wholeness, to reflect it. So I have made some mistakes with dream telepathy where I've chosen to work with students that I believe now maybe we weren't ready to go to that level together, but we did, and then had to learn. I'm so grateful for those lessons, because I learned about how to then set those psychic boundaries and kind of reclaim that space. I've also had very successful dream telepathy experiences with friends where we basically decide a location and we decide a totem or an item that we're going to find in that location that's going to wake us up into lucidity. And then we decide an intention for what we want to do together when we're there. So some dream partners, we've gone to Egypt, we've looked for an Anubis statue, and we're there to learn more about ancient dreaming techniques, and come back saying, oh, my statue is gold, oh, mine was black. We saw the same one but from a different angle, and been able to compare notes. And really it's such a fascinating exploration as soul families to do this kind of work. One last thing that's coming to mind to share is around a project I started working on in 2016 called the Temple Guild, where it's a subsection of Dream Council where we basically dream on not only our personal life but on collective life. We dreamed during certain ecological disasters or political times on the planet, where we come together as a group to amplify one another's intention to dream on these subjects and bring them back to waking life to share with our community, and to find inspiration in the dream time towards what creative action we can take to help those projects or those purposes. So there's a lot still that we can explore and play with together as community and dreaming that I'm really excited about. But I found that most of the work right now is in just waking us back up, reminding us that we are dreamers, that we have this natural ability, and to also help amplify and support the healing process around what comes up, this kind of unresolved material that often surfaces in the beginning of that practice. So the telepathy dream work and stuff is I'm really interested in, but I think that it comes again with that kind of interdimensional diplomacy. And yeah, I mean, most of us, when we think about one lucid dreaming technique that's awesome is to write a list of everything you'd like to do next time you become lucid. And so that way when you kind of have it in your mind. But that list can also reveal a lot about your desires and what you really want to be creating in waking life. And so if you're like, well, next time I'm lucid, I'm going to have some really great sex, then like, what is that saying about waking life and your desires in waking life? And what creative action can you take in this world to manifest that desire, both in the dream and the waking? And so looking at that list can be really inspiring towards waking world action as well. One of the things on my list is to visit big trees when I become lucid. And so it reminds me of how much I value trees in this world and how much the trees anchor me to the dream time and in waking lucidity. So those kinds of tools and having that kind of structure can be helpful also to not to not get lost in all of it, I guess. You know, or to have good, to learn how to be polite, I guess. Have good diplomacy.
Big trees are a wonderful symbol of being able to maintain multiple branches of consciousness or DNA and yet still be linked to the ground, to the root.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's something that's so easy to lose if one does not maintain some level of focused awareness on it, or have a lot of training and discipline in the mind to call back that.
Yeah, that's right. And it's interesting to see how many of our trees and our oldest trees are being cut down. If they're to symbolize that, then what does that say about us as humankind that we're cutting these big trees down? And in these lucid dreams with the trees, I'm often in ancient civilizations where these giant trees were the center of religious practice in society, and the leaves of these trees were often in the dreams. I'm preparing the leaves of these trees to give to everyone in the community, and that everyone drinks from the same tree, and our ancestors would drink from the same tree. And so it would connect us into that collective memory and support us in grounding in our individuation as we are relating with that collective story. And so when we lose those home trees, like an Avatar, and the home tree gets cut down, I don't know about you, but when I saw that scene, I was weeping, crying, because deeply in my humanness, I know that feeling. And I long to go back to that home tree where we all gather around and drink from the same source. And then, you know, express our individuality from that point. And yeah, there just been, I've had dreams. I was on the ocean, on the ship on the Atlantic Ocean, sailing near the island of Malta, and had received a dream of a beautiful old tree there that was cut down, and what happened when these trees were cut, what took place for us in our consciousness because of it.
What's really coming in for me right now as you speak about the trees is it reminds me of my desire to bring people with me onto like what I perceive as a more positive timeline, and to not be so lost in the stories of destruction and things like that, but I also recognize that some beings are drawn to the wound, you know, and drawn to explore in that space. And in me, at some level, I must still be resonating with it if that's the type of person that I'm inviting. And that sometimes my approach has been kind of like taking an axe to their tree, or at least branches of their tree, that I'm like, you don't need that anymore. That branch is sick. Just let it go. It's dead. And it comes back to what we were talking about earlier about respect and being able to be so aware that when there's this urge to kind of pull somebody back into the raft and be like, that's not the direction I want to go, to be able to relax into that inner goddess and trust. And that has been a deep challenge for me up until now in this life. And I do my best to cultivate that awareness each day, and to be able to maintain my state without getting triggered by people talking about things. Because from one perspective, when you speak about the trees being cut down, I've generally forgotten that timeline on Earth. And I tend to reference only what's in front of me and what's representing. So right now, it's like you are the embodiment of that particular timeline, voicing to me that, hey, there's a challenge with this creation. What is the solution to this? And there's also this call put out to the universe, it feels like, for deeper understanding and awareness about what these symbols represent. Okay. And so I feel drawn to it. But then sometimes I've had issues with how to navigate those waters in a respectful way, both to myself for getting involved, so to speak, from whatever other project or timeline I was on. Am I willing to devote the next 6 months of my life to working with this student? Are they ready? Are we both ready to go to that level? So I think that's something that people are, or at least I've encountered up until now, teachers who seem to acknowledge the group collective consciousness as such this strong entity that almost seems immovable. And I practice every day just letting go of the perception of the collective as this set in stone thing. And I see myself as like the center of the toroid, like the vortex that's spinning the realities in and through me. And in that moment, I get to witness, I get to be the voice of that particular timeline and acknowledge as source what is working and what maybe needs some healing and love, and to be able to invite in that healing into this space.
Yeah. Yeah. And we all come into this world with our own unique gifts and stories and connections and dreams, and when we share that with each other, we're weaving those timelines together into a tapestry, is how I like to see it. And there is a sense of kind of, again, the neti, like it's all of that, and it's not that, it's none of that, there
and
is
that helps with the divine laughter
from that dream, where my neighbor here in town, they cut a big fir tree down from in front of her house, and there was a crow's nest in it, and she was very upset. They did it to build a driveway, and super upset. And we're like, what are we gonna do, and I'm like, well, let's go plant another one. Let's go plant a new tree. And she went and got this beautiful red dogwood from the nursery. And we had a tree that had died here at our house, and so we pulled that up and we planted a new one, and it's doing great out there, and it's going to provide lots of shade and home for birds. And so I found that sometimes, like, I've been like, oh, I don't want to dwell there. There's been pain that's come up from the past, which there's the past and then there's history, and those are different things, because we can't possibly derive everything from what's happened in the past. We're only given the records of what's happened. But, in being informed by that, being informed by the dream time, allowing myself to feel that pain and then say neti, like continuing on to that timelessness, it opens the way for these opportunities to then take creative action here by planting some trees, or doing something here. It all it all is sort of feeding a more vivid and lucid life too, and where we are in the 3D. And so I find that we also can sometimes, like our individual path, we have this trajectory, we have a purpose, we have a mission, and sometimes we can be like, oh, well, no, we're supposed to go this way, like this is my mission. But when we bring in other centers of toroidal fields, it creates this whole galaxy of energy, and they orbit around each other, and there's different magnetic poles. It's a whole other dance that I think we're remembering to do more and more through avenues like Guardian Alliance and Dream Council, and here in 13th Harmonic, and we're learning how to kind of remain centered in our own field and interact with one another to support kind of a greater galactic field. So that comes up.
It can be like navigating a riptide. Once one begins to venture back out into the collective, whatever form that appears in at the present moment, and constantly cultivating that beginner's mind, that neti, and just letting go and allowing new water to come through self in each moment. And for me, I became very aware again of what intentions am I holding in this moment? Because when I'm having a conversation with you right in this moment, in a different moment slightly, but when I'm having a conversation with you, then if I begin to feel uncomfortable, recognizing that that's not you, that's me. I have some, in those moments of discomfort, what's going on from my perception is that I have some sort of an expectation, some sort of an intention that's being held, and I have a opposing belief to that. So it's almost like there are these two heads arguing within myself, because I'm like, we're completely on the right path to get where we want to go. And then this other path is like, this is not the way to get there. We have to go up that mountain. You know, why are we hanging out with this person? They can't see, like, we're heading towards a cliff or whatever. And so it's being able to rein back in that other side and be like, hey, we're just going with the flow. And I know that we will be guided by easing into the flow, by being in that, what are they? Effortless effort, that state of just allowing the observer to be here in the body, and to be able to step back to that GoPro level and just kind of watch it and not feel so involved as if something is going wrong, because that perception that something is going wrong is a subtle signal to me, at least, that I have an intention or expectation that says that this is not going for my highest outcome. And it's both true and not true in that moment. It's always going towards the positive outcome, but it's up to me to realign with that perception. And to do so requires a level of conscious awareness that, in my experience, required cultivation. So in cultivating, here's where the question comes in for you. You talked about people who dismiss dreams. And for me, the dream and the multidimensionality, the being able to hear through telepathy and to be able to see spirit guides and other dimensional beings is strongly attuned to the imagination and that hypnagogic state. And to be so dismissive of a dream is to then say that that state is kind of unimportant, that the things that happen in that state are not real. And I think what I've experienced at Light, what I'd like to hear you speak on is how that multidimensionality, how the dream connects into how channeling works, how flowing spirit in the waking dream works, conjoined with the imagination. Your perspective.
Yeah, and I want to kind of this is my perspective, and also I've learned a lot through the teachings of Robert Moss around this, especially around what he speaks of about whether we are informing our, whether we think our waking life is informing our dreams, or whether we're allowing our dreams to inform our waking life, and the conversation that's happening between the waking and dreaming life. And that even when we are remembering our dreams, we're often like, oh, well, that's just a reflection of what's happening here, rather than seeing that they feed back the other way. And that's something that I perks my interest a lot. Like if I dream of an animal, I want to like wear that animal's, print, or draw that, and I want to bring it back here. There's a feedback between. It feels like sometimes we do have dreams that are very bizarre and nonsensical, and we could find meaning in them. Some of them are there to process the waking life. Some of them are going to be more random. Some of them are not as important to analyze. We'll know. It's an intuitive sense. We'll know when there's a big dream that's calling to be processed. And when we do, recognizing that this they're informing something, they're informing us towards creative action here in this world, that they're giving us that gift. There's another piece that I don't want to forget, calling back around this. It has to do with the relevance of our dreams and waking life, and how they are feeding into us here. But if it comes back, it'll come back.
Well, if
Yeah.
each dream life was a life, was an actual life, like even if it was only 10 seconds long, that's probably what it's felt like at times to dip into this form, because it keeps changing emotional states so much, and the memory is accessed based upon the emotional state that is being held.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that psychology has been really looking at, is state-dependent memory. Walk through a door or a portal and you forget whatever it was, maybe not you, but a person can easily forget what it was that they were going to find once a threshold is crossed. And that signifies that if a threshold, if a barrier, a portal, or a gateway, a guardian is going to be crossed, then it's important to hold one's attention and focus gently, but hold it still as the portal is being crossed. And maybe that's the reason that so many of us have forgotten who we are when we're born. When we cross that womb threshold, it wasn't being held within the awareness. So something that I do see coming is more pre-consciousness in the babies, like being able to be tuned to their Akashic records and be aware. I don't know if you ever watched the Dune books, but we can dive into that another day. We're approaching the end of our recorded time. So for a final kind of statement or unfolding, a gift for the people who are watching, what is it about today that we most needed to hear from Spirit, from your perspective?
Yeah. Reflecting on everything that we've spoken of, I do feel like timelines and understanding the timeless, spaceless, or multiple timeline reality that's existing, that we tap into with dreams, and then what we're doing over there, and how we're interacting with one another, and what we carry from the past, but also what we're not limited to by the past anymore, seems to have been coming up. Yeah, so the last piece it came back to me is around lucid waking and interacting in the waking world from the perspective of a dreamer. And when we have lots of practice as a dreamer of seeing without our eyes and hearing without our ears and speaking without our mouths, we start to really become more sensitive to our ability to do that here in this world, in the waking world. And we can treat this world, I do feel there is a discernible difference. But I also feel that I can notice when those gates start to open up, or when that veil becomes thin between those worlds more, because I'm more attuned. I remember what that feels like. And the world of synchronicity, the magic of synchronicity in this waking world, helps remind us of the dreamlike nature of where we are. So one thing I would love to just offer as an invitation to those who are watching is today to notice the synchronicities, and maybe even ask the synchronicities a question. Maybe decide to go on a synchronicity walk, or even just in your heart and mind say, ask a question towards the universe that you would like to see a response from, and then go for that walk, go through your day, go walk and see how the universe begins to respond in this waking dream with feedback from that kind of incubation. And I've found that that is one way that I have found to integrate those worlds, is actually through the synchronicity, and recognizing that I can become more lucid of my interaction in this in the synchronicity in this world. So I would invite us to all practice that today. And I thank you for such an inspiring conversation. I just pray that this conversation meets you all well and in peace and at the right time, and inspires us all to awaken that dreamer within us. So thanks so much, Taylor. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was a privilege to have you here. And I think that lucid waking life is absolutely something worth striving for. I believe it's deeply connected to the emotional state that is carried. So I look forward to, really building the anchors to hold that state, because I think that's really where a dreamer is challenged, is can you stay lucid while everything else comes up that used to pull you out of the lucid state? And can you integrate that? That's the magic zone, is can you go into your own shadow and integrate it while remaining lucid? So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in today. You can find more about Emakhet on readingsforthepeople.com and dreamcouncil.net. She recently released a new course called The Great Dream Adventure, right?
The Great Dream Journal Adventure. Yep.
Yes. And if you're looking to get started into finding what magic your dreams have to share with you, this is definitely a great path to utilize. So thank you again. Namaste. And we'll look forward to having you on the show again in the future.
Yeah, me too. Thanks so much.